Ladies and gentlemen, EFI organizes ThinkForest events since more than 10 years, and we invite high-level scientists, decision makers from the policy world, but also from business organizations and stakeholder organizations to deliberate at the science policy interface. And it has become a brand. And I'm very happy that we have this ThinkForest event now here in Rome. And our first keynote speaker of course needs no introduction. It's our EFI director, Marc Palahí, a very well-recognized scientist, published widely, of course also in Nature. Marc will today talk about the age of forest, and I'm very pleased to give you the floor now, Marc. Please.
Thank you, Helga. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the grand opening of the Biocities facility. Let me start by thanking once more the Italian government for the visionary support in establishing this Biocities facility. As you will see in a moment, it's not surprising that Italy has the vision to support such a creative, innovative approach to cities, because Italy in the past has been leading many of the most important transformations in humanity. Also, I would like to thank the hospitality of CREA for providing premises to the European Forest Institute. If I can manage my slides myself, it will be very convenient. Yes, just a second. Ten seconds. Yes. Okay. So let's start. The 21st century has been nicknamed in many different ways. The digital era, the time of the fourth industrial revolution, the Urbanocene, the age of the city. But in the next minutes, I want to share with you a vision on why, above all, this needs to be the age of forest. Because forests will need to play a crucial transformational role in shaping the future of humanity, a sustainable future. But before talking to the future, I want to take you on a brief journey through history. Winston Churchill used to say that the farther you can look backward, the farther you are likely to see forward. So it's always important to look to history, to contextualize and decide where to go in the future. So let's start from the very beginning, because it's important to remember that before trees emerged on Earth and forests expanded, and I am talking about more than 350 million years ago, our planet was totally different. The climate of Earth was radically different. It was 10 degrees warmer than today, and the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere were almost 10 times what they are today. But with the appearance of trees, the miracle happened. It totally changed. Why? Because trees are very special organisms. They use solar energy to transform CO2 and water into biochemical energy, which is at the basis of the pyramid of life in our planet. And all that while releasing oxygen and water, oxygen that we breathe and water that we drink. So basically, forests transformed the planet, and they became at the same time the backbone for life in our planet. So we could say that forests changed the course of life in our planet. In fact, this is why we should say that this is not the planet of the apes. This is the planet of the trees. And in fact, ourselves, we are the result of millions of years of evolution in the most sophisticated laboratory on Earth, our forest. We are the result of interacting with trees within forest. Our physiognomy, the way we are formed, our genetics is the result of millions of years of interaction. Our first ancestors appeared only 7 to 9 million years ago. Homo sapiens only 200,000 years ago. The first trees more than 350 million years ago. So it is not surprising that the tree of life is an archetype, a symbol that is repeated across all religions in the world, across all the cultures in the world. You have it in the Genesis, in the Bible, but you have it in the Upanishad, in the Hindu tradition, the inverted tree of life connecting heaven and earth. You have it in the Amazon cosmology, in the Nordic tradition. You have it also in the Buddhist tradition. Siddhartha Gautama became Buddha, the enlightened one, after meditating under a sacred tree, a ficus religiosa. So I think we don't know that, our connection, but deep inside ourselves, we know that the trees are the source of life and that we are here because of them. Why I am saying all this? Because I think it's important to know where we are coming from if we need to decide where to go next. And it is also very important to understand that forests once transformed the planet, now that we will need them to transform our world once more so that we have a sustainable future for the future generations. This transformation is crucial because sadly we have arrived at a tipping point. Our world in many respects have become too big for our planet. And this century we have seen a lot of signals of these multidimensional tipping points. Just remember, in 15 years only, 15 years, we have seen an unprecedented economic crisis, an unprecedented pandemic. We have also seen that climate change and biodiversity loss are not threats for the future. They are crises today, crises that we can see on a daily basis. And in addition, the ongoing war has made us realize that our addiction to fossil resources is not only an environmental problem, it's an economic and security threat. So in this context, it is also very important to understand that all these crises are not different crises. They are the same one. They are just different consequences of the same fundamental problem, our economic system, a system that is addicted to fossil resources, to consumption at all costs, and a system that has failed to value our most important capital and the basis for human health and well-being, which is nature. So, having arrived at this tipping point, we need to rethink our economy totally if we want to rewrite our future still on time. And this is going to be very challenging, because I am not talking about an era of change. I am talking about a change of era, as profound as the one we experienced 500 years ago, in the time of Renaissance, which gave birth to the modern era. By the way, a transformation which had its epicenter here, in Italy. The Renaissance is defined in many ways. The time where Western world reconnected back to the world of classics, Roma, Grecia, but it could be defined as the time in history with the Western world reconnected to its future, because it was the time where human intellect was placed at the center to explain the world. So human intellect replaced God as the center of explaining the world surrounding us. It was also the first time in history where science and art work at a totally different scale in symbiosis. A key word, symbiosis. It was the first time that art and science worked together to express and explain the world. You could not explain Leonardo da Vinci without his friendship and relationship with Luca Pacioli, a mathematician. Together, Stefano, you know this well, together they discuss and argue about the divine proportions that inspire many architects. So you see an artist and a mathematician, a scientist working together. But the interdisciplinarity of the Renaissance went beyond that, because Luca Pacioli, for example, he was a very interesting person. He was a mathematician, but he revolutionized banking because he developed the double accounting bookkeeping method. The debit and credit was invented by Luca Pacioli. And it was very important because then banking had the capacity, the predictability to scale up investments. And something that is not repeated many times is that Italian bankers financed the Renaissance. They were visionaries. They believed in a better world as, as a way to have better business as well. So you would not have Leonardo, Michelangelo, Botticelli without families like the Medici, the Pazzi, the Strozzi, the Rucellai, the big bankers, the visionaries that wanted a better world. Not only the bankers finance art, they also finance the scientific revolution. Galileo Galilei was sponsored by the Medici family. I am saying this because now more than ever, the finance sector needs to be reinvented. And I think they need to go back to 500 years ago to get the inspiration from Italian bankers to see what is needed now to transform our world. At this point, I would like to say also that there was a technological innovation that made also possible the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, which was the printing press. Because the printing press allowed for the first time to systematize, replicate, and disseminate knowledge and information in a totally different scale, which was crucial to implement the scientific method, which is about replicability, critical sharing knowledge, and advancing. So this is important also for our discussion today. A technology can also help to catalyze transformations. It's not enough, but it's necessary. So together, all this accumulation of knowledge, scientific revolution, Renaissance, allow also for universities to gradually replace the monasteries as the knowledge hubs in Europe. This was a gradual change, but universities play a crucial role in developing a new vision for a better world. And this had also consequences in our cities because, contrary to monasteries, universities are located in cities. So you could start seeing a gradual creativity, innovation in the cities, economic progress that resulted 300 years after the Renaissance in a new transformation, the Industrial Revolution. Again, like it happened with the printing press, there was another technological innovation that acted as a catalyst, the steam engine. Again, it revolutionized the way we could manufacture economic goods. Economic production moved from the workshops to the factories. And that required a new scale of manpower. This is why a new social class emerged, the worker, the proletario, emerged to meet this new demand. But two more ingredients were needed to make this transformation. New scale of capital, and capitalism with big letters started then. And again, bankers play an important role. And also energy. We needed a new scale of energy to feed this new economic machinery. And this is when we started using fossil resources. First coal, then oil, then gas. So we could say that the fossil era starts then. And not only we changed the whole energy system, which had key impacts in the thermodynamics of the planet, but we also changed the key materials to build in our environment. We moved to steel first, and then to concrete. So you can say that with the Industrial Revolution, we moved the engine of our economy from the biosphere to the lithosphere. And this is very important to keep in mind. But there was also a very interesting development in parallel or as a consequence of all these transformations. And it's that a new megatrend started, urbanization. If you look back before the Industrial Revolution, only 7–8% of the world's population were living in cities. Now we have more than 50% of the global population living in cities. England, which was the first country where the Industrial Revolution started, already in 1850 had 50% of the population living in cities. So what you start seeing here, you see that industrialization, urbanization, technological innovation mutually accelerate each other. And also economic productivity. If you see here on the left, the global GDP evolution in the last centuries, and you see the average size of the 100 biggest cities in the planet, you see an exponential growth. This is easy to explain because cities, when they emerged thousands of years ago, they emerged because they are the most effective system to self-organize ourselves to optimize social and economic interactions. It's the most effective ways we have to create economic wealth by the division of labor, innovation, specialization. All that minimizing transaction cost and the cost of infrastructures. But I want to add here an important reflection. If you look how biological systems develop in time, you see that in any biological organism, the energy available for growth continuously decreases with increasing size until growth finally stops. This is repeated in all biological organisms, forest, animals, etc. But if you look at how cities develop, and there are very interesting scientific research on that, on the science of cities, cities develop in the opposite way. You know, the larger the city, the faster it grows, provided there are resources and space available. And this is what changed with the Industrial Revolution. Resources became unlimited because we moved from the biosphere to the lithosphere. They are unlimited, basically, resources in the form of coal, oil, gas, and then materials. And this is a very important reflection because this catalytic accelerating role of the cities is, of course, a big challenge, but we need to transform it into an opportunity. So we need to capture this creativity, this acceleration, and guide it towards the right direction. So basically, cities are nowadays our innovation and economic hubs. They have the responsibility to lead the next transformation of humanity. They need to lead a new economy, an economy where life and not consumption becomes its true engine and purpose. An economy that prospers in harmony with nature, but is powered by nature. This is what some of us call the circular bioeconomy. A new economy that is needed to restore harmony between humanity, nature, and the environment. And forests are going to be the key infrastructures to make this transformation possible. They are the most important ecological infrastructure on Earth, but also the most important economic infrastructure. Ecology and economy come from the same word, the ancient Greek word oikos, which means home, environment. And I think one of the challenges we have is to overcome the past dichotomy between ecology and economy of the last several hundred years. They need to become one. Ecology should be the source of economy. Forests are not only important because they are the main source of life, the backbone for biodiversity. They are our largest terrestrial carbon sink. They are the main terrestrial source for oxygen and water, but also because they are a source for non-food, non-feed, renewable biological resources. And the good news now is that with the new technology and science, we can transform those resources into a totally new range of bio-based solutions that will be crucial to replace fossil materials, non-renewable materials. We need to bring the engine of our economy from the lithosphere to the biosphere. And this is where nature, together with technology, need to play the crucial role. So let me give you 3 examples of what, with the new technologies, we can do now in transforming wood to address some of these big decarbonization challenges that we are going to face in many sectors. The first one has been mentioned by the Swedish ambassador. We can now produce wood engineering products to replace at scale steel and concrete. Remember, whose production is responsible for about 12% of the global carbon emissions. And using wood in construction does not only reduce carbon emissions compared to these 2 materials, de facto allows us to transform our cities into carbon storage infrastructures. Because for every cubic meter of wood that we use, we are storing a ton of CO2. At the same time, remember, 1 cubic meter of wood engineering products weighs about half a ton. But 1 cubic meter of concrete weighs almost 3 tons. So it is also a big change in terms of amount of resources used to build our environment. So this has implications for circularity, for resource efficiency as well. Another example comes from the fashion industry. Fashion industry is also one of the main environmental offenders, even if there are many different types of fashion industry, as we will hear later. There is the fast fashion, which is very damaging, slow fashion. But the big impacts of the fashion industry are due to the materials, basically, the fashion industry is using. Nowadays, more than 60% is synthetic fibers, polyester, very carbon intense, generating the problem of microplastics. Also cotton, even if it is a biological product, is not produced in a sustainable way in the majority of times, because it uses a lot of inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, and water. So my key message here, we have the technology to transform wood into sustainable wood-based textiles to replace at scales polyester, and also partly cotton. But cotton is a very good product. It's that we need to produce it in the right way. And this is also where agroforestry systems could become the main framework to produce the cotton in the 21st century in a climate-positive, nature-positive way. So you see that forests and trees do not only inspire the transformation of materials, but also the way we can produce things. Finally, we can transform also wood into a revolutionary material called nanocellulose, 5 times stronger than steel, but much lighter. The first car made of nanocellulose was produced in Japan 3 years ago. This car weighs 50% less than a conventional car, and this has a lot of implications for energy consumption. This car could use electric batteries using lignin, which is a component of wood, instead of graphite, which is used in the electric batteries and is very carbon intense and only produced in a few countries in the world, creating geopolitical challenges. Elon Musk just opened a big factory to produce electric batteries in Mozambique. There are not many places where you can do that. So you see, wood can solve also resource security issues, sustainability. The same tires of the car could use, again, lignin to reinforce rubber instead of carbon black, which is currently used to give strength to the rubber. And this carbon black is very contaminating, producing a lot of microplastics and carbon intense. I could give you many more examples. The main point here is everything is made of oil today can be made of wood with the emerging technologies. But let's move forward, because technologies alone will not solve our problems. We need new references, new frameworks, new visions, new concepts to guide the transformation and to guide the use of technologies. This is why we developed the concept of Biocities. Biocities provides us with a new framework, a new vision to channel all this technology. Why? Cities need to lead the transformation. This is clear because our economic activities and innovation is happening here. So cities need to become the change that we want for our world. Winston Churchill, again, used to say, we shape our buildings, then they shape us. The same is happening in cities. If we want to shape our economy, we need to shape our cities so that we mirror the future that we want. And this requires a holistic approach to reimagine and transform cities. Professor Marco Marchetti already mentioned the principles. I will not repeat them, but remember, cities need to prosper in symbiosis with nature. It's our best partner, our most reliable partner. Cities need to be based on circular bioeconomy systems and value chains, not linear fossil economy ones. And cities, biocities, need to partner with the bioregions, where the food, materials, energy, water is coming from. So we need to overcome the traditional dichotomy between rural and urban. We are living all in the same world, and we need to partner. So we need these alliances. And finally, and I am finishing now, finally, cities need to lead the vision intellectually, like it happened in the Renaissance. We need a new Renaissance. After 500 years, we need a new Renaissance. And I think there is a symbolism behind having the Biocities facility here in Italy, because you did that 500 years ago. Now you need to do it again. So Biocities will need to provide this intellectual vision. And if the first Renaissance reconnected the world to the classics, now the new Renaissance needs to reconnect humanity with nature. There is a huge gap that we have created in the last 200 years. We are totally separated from nature, and we are part of nature. We are part of the solution. In addition, if the first Renaissance was very much shaped by the symbiosis between science and art, we need it now also, but especially we need a symbiosis between nature and technology. We need to put artificial intelligence, all these new technologies, at the service of natural intelligence. In the West, we are very good at producing technologies to solve problems that we are creating ourselves. We think that technology is the target. Technology is a tool. Technology is useless if it doesn't have a purpose. And I think this is a big paradigm shift that we need to achieve, you know? We are obsessed with technology. And I think the most important thing is to be able to transform science and technology into wisdom. This is a missing gap. We are good at creating huge tons of science and technology, but we are creating more problems than ever. So if we are not wiser, why all this science, all this knowledge? And also, and yesterday we had an inspiring talk by Professor Ted Farrell, universities need to change. They need to go back to the roots. Universities were established, and the name university comes from the aspiration for universal knowledge, connecting the dots for a higher purpose, for wisdom. Nowadays, we have universities, the academic world has become too specialized. Again, we are obsessed publishing in a very disciplinary approach. We need to change the way we reward our scientists. We need to create transdisciplinary centers in the universities to connect the dots. Universities are there for a higher purpose. So this is a very important development. And finally, coming back to the banking, the finance sector also needs to go back and learn from the Medicis, the Pazzi, the Strozzi, the Ruccolai, who changed the world. And they were people that really believe in creating a better world. So just to finish, remind you, be humble, please. This is not the planet of the apes. This is the planet of the trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc, for this inspiring talk. I think you gave us plenty to think about, and it was a really nice travel back in time, and it shows the importance of forests and trees, and including for cities. And we now have a panel discussion, and I invited Marc to sit with the panel. And Gesche Schiffer-Decker, she's our EFI communication manager in Bonn. She will moderate this panel, and I would like to invite our distinguished guests, our panelists, to come to the stage. And the topic of the panel today is challenges and opportunities for cities and the role of forests. Please welcome our panelists. We are very happy to have them here, and Gesche will introduce them. Thank you very much. Yes, and Sandra will sit here. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marc, for this inspiring speech. I will pick up some of the points also in the panel discussion. I was already introduced by Helga, thank you very much. And we will discuss in this, because we've been talking a lot about the potential of trees and urban spaces and also wood-based material, but we have not been talking so much about the challenges. And that's also something we would like to address in this panel, and to see how we can overcome those challenges. And that's why this panel discussion is called Challenges and Opportunities for Cities and the Role of Forests. And before I introduce the panelists, I would like to encourage the panelists to be interactive on this panel. So, of course, I have prepared questions for you. But it would also be great if you would respond to each other to kind of, make this more interactive and more engaging for the audience. In case I don't see you, you can, just talk. We're in Italy, so people are used to interrupt each other and be very energetic and active. So that's, I would like to encourage you to be that. And now I would like to start with introducing the panelists. To my left is Sandra Frank. She's the marketing director and the head of global movement at Arvid. And Arvid's work focuses on the revolutionary changing of the building industry from, we've already been discussing it, using finite and fossil-based resources and carbon-intensive materials to using renewable materials, sustainable material and bio-based materials, for instance, wood. Then to my left is also Yvonne Lynch. She's an advisor to cities and national governments worldwide on how to develop greener cities and of course also more green spaces with a purpose to also adapt rapidly to the climate change that we are facing and the more extreme climate conditions. She's currently involved with Green KSA, which is a major initiative to sustainably green Saudi Arabia. I imagine that to be very challenging, but also quite an interesting job. And she has also collaborated with the Royal Commission of Riyadh City. And she has also worked for the city of Melbourne in Australia, amongst other positions. To my right, I have Rosella Ravalli. She's since more than 25 years actually, a change maker driven by purpose. I think we all are driven by purpose, but especially in the field of fashion, this is, I mean, imagining 25 years ago, this was really something that wasn't common. This purpose has now led her to be the sustainability director at Armani Group. And prior to Armani, she was working as the head of corporate sustainability and responsibility at Gucci, where she led the company to achieve internationally recognized leadership on sustainability. And that's something I also appreciate very much. She shares her knowledge also as a popular lecturer at universities. Then on the right-hand side, we have Stefano Boeri. He's an architect and urban planner. And you might all know his Bosco Verticale. We will talk about that later. But he's also a full professor for urban planning at Politecnico di Milan and the director of the Future Lab at Tongji University in Shanghai. Stefano has also been invited as a visiting professor to many international universities, including Harvard. And he is the president of the Future of Cities Foundation and of the Scientific Committee for Forestami, which is the urban forestation project in the Milan metropolitan area. And then on the very right, you've already been introduced to him and listened to his speech, Marc Palahí. Okay, I would like to start with an icebreaker. And it's something I often do in moderation. It's called a brain dump. And a brain dump is basically that I'll be asking all the panelists now what the first 3 things are that come to their mind when they think about urban green and cities. And please think in hashtags. So don't, not 3 sentences, but just 3 words. And I will start with Sandra. 3 hashtags.
Trees, of course. So trees. Trees, of course. Is it? Yeah, yeah. But also using our senses. So things that we want to touch. Okay. Yes. You hear me? So I repeat it again. Trees, of course, and which is also something that you can touch. And you can smell and feel. So it's something that touches our senses. That's my...
Trees, senses, and touch.
Yeah.
Good. Yvonne, you're next.
I would say hashtag quality of life. So we know that greener cities are more livable cities and they're happier, healthier spaces for citizens. I would say hashtag future because maybe the future city is a world that's not dominated by smart tech and artificial intelligence. Maybe it's one where people live more closely with nature. And then I would say hashtag resilience, because trees and green spaces provide many of the answers that we need to climate adapt our cities to extreme events.
Thanks. That was already closing remarks, but we we still have some inspiring comments ahead of us. Rosella, you're next.
Yes, if I imagine, yes? Più vicino, più vicino, più vicino. Voilà. Perfetto. Grazie. Thank you. Yeah, if I dream the Biocity, 3 words: circular, inclusive, and harmony.
Thank you very much, Rosella. Stefano.
I think you talk about connectivity. Okay, sorry. Connectivity may be declined in 3 main directions. One is, let's say, connectivity between biodiversity hotspots, putting them together. The second is connectivity between private and public stakeholders, the forestation processes. And the third is a connectivity between a bottom-up effort we have all to do and a public direction from the top.
Thank you very much. Marc, do you also want to say your 3 hashtags? He said I can ask him everything, so.
Yes. First one, life. Bio, it means life. Life. Harmony, holistic.
Thank you very much. That was really intriguing. Now I would like to talk about the challenges and also solutions you found in your work with green material and green cities. And I would like to start with Yvonne, because as I already mentioned in my introduction, you advise cities and national governments on how to develop greener cities. And I would like to ask you, what are the challenges that you're facing? Because, I mean, some have already been mentioned in the speeches before, legislative, for instance, challenges. But also, how do you communicate the potential? Because I imagine that you also need to be convincing to not just governments, but also to the citizens who eventually need to support. I mean, Stefano has also mentioned it, that you need to have the people on board. So how do you do that?
Okay, so I think looking at the challenges, one of the issues we have is when we think about urban forestry, we think about the whole of the forest, and we sometimes forget the individual trees. And so I think probably the protection of individual trees within our city is, in our collective cities, is one of the most important things that we can do. So you can dream a green dream for your city, and you can plan these great ideas, but unless you're committed to protecting your already existing assets, you're never going to achieve it. And I can give an example of what I mean. So back in 2013 in Australia, the Horticulture Institute there set a goal to make Australian cities 20% greener by 2020. And they involved every stakeholder across the country in what we thought at the time was a really great movement, and it was very well funded, very well publicized. I advised a lot of the local governments around Australia on how to develop urban forest strategies. And by 2020, when we got there and we looked back, what had happened actually was that we had 88 local government cities around Australia put in place urban forest strategies with targets to grow their tree canopy cover. They'd planted a lot of trees, they'd created new green spaces, but what had actually happened when we looked at the baselines was canopy cover had actually decreased for 70% of those cities around Australia. So why was that? Because everybody was going around planting new trees and trying to grow their canopy, but everybody was not protecting the existing trees. And so we're all in this situation where we're looking at increasing urban development as our populations continue to expand. And so protecting the existing trees and pricing them, I have a lot to say on that I won't talk about now, but that is essential. And then to answer the other part of your question, I think that mindset is one of our biggest challenges. So if you look at cities and how we think about ourselves and what we value grey infrastructure. And really what we need to do is to move to put urban greening or green infrastructure on par with the grey infrastructure. So green needs to be not something that's nice to have. It needs to be something that's essential for the vital functioning of our cities. And right now we focus too much on aesthetics associated with the urban forest and trees. So we need to bring engineers into the game. I mean, because they create the spaces that can create thriving systems for trees, or they can destroy the trees. And so they really need to be part of developing our urban forest, our urban greening strategies with us. And then we need to look at how we develop those business cases around return on investment. We need to look at how we're valuing ecosystem services within cities, and obviously integrating the community to have a voice that it moves a little bit beyond tokenistic tree planting and integrating community into actual decision making so that they can be part of creating longevity for the future of the city.
Thanks, Yvonne. Yes, thank you also for pointing out the role of communities, which I think is very often not taken enough into consideration when people come with those great plans. Then people, I mean, on the ground sometimes argue about a new tree that is planted in front of their house. So it's very important to have those overarching narratives that convince people, and also create ownership of those trees and take care of those trees that are already there. So thank you for highlighting that. Sandra, I would, because we've already been talking about communication and new visions that are really important, but also, of course, knowledge, and sharing this knowledge on how we can create a more sustainable future. I think it's also an essential part of your work at Arvid. So I was wondering, and Marc described it in his speech, people are still focusing very much on fossil-based material, using fossil-based material for buildings, and we know where it comes from because it was the new great shit in the 19th century, but it's obviously not anymore because we kind of losing our path, and the resources are limited. So can you tell us why people are still so much focused and so used to use these fossil-based materials, and do you also have some illustrating examples how more renewable material is used in cities, in buildings in particular, because that's your field of expertise?
Now, how we will change this?
Yes, I would maybe first an answer to why do you think people are, I mean, it's not, we don't see a rapid change yet, but we would need to see a rapid change to reach the climate targets. So how can we stimulate this rapid change that we need also in the construction sector? And why do you think people are still so, many people are narrow-minded and really still focused on using steel, for instance, and concrete for buildings?
Yeah, so I work in the building industry.
I know.
And very happy to have been able the last 10 years, because it's 10 years now since we built our first 8-story totally timber apartment building in Stockholm. And I realized I had to learn a lot more about the forests, because that was not my field before. And this is also a part of it. For me, coming down to Rome, I'm very thankful for the invitation, but also transferring knowledge and exchanging experiences. What I noticed, or what we noticed before, we started to do these small, little, very easy brochures, because we realized the politicians didn't know anything about construction in timber. All the people, the policymakers at the city council didn't know anything. But they knew actually also at the universities, the older teachers, they taught what they had been taught to the new generations. So there are so many structures in our societies that's built up from the Industrial Revolution. And it's very easy to do whatever we know and to do it again and again and again. And the construction industry is very, very traditional and conservative. And we have an expression in Sweden, which is that you put your head into the sand. And you don't want to see those problems that are obviously there. So I came from a totally another field and was fortunate enough to have a boss that loved people to be outspoken and ask questions instead of just saying yes and thank you. So we were a very alternative, both at the time, both a developer and a construction company. So we also got the knowledge that was intercrossing, both from a developer's perspective, but also from a construction perspective. So we knew the exact costs. We knew the rules and how to lead the structural engineers and the architects and to build something. And also we needed to work very tight with the industry in the northern parts of Sweden. So, and I could really see what happened in Sweden after our first building, which has been, we've had over 25,000 people from 150 different countries, that was nothing we could even expect or even imagine anywhere in our heads. But these two first houses, they just had their own lives. They took us around the globe to talk in different areas like this, but they also took the world to this little place outside Stockholm. And it was very obvious what a physical building that is there will do for an industry. Today, 10 years later, there is, like the Swedish ambassador was talking about now, there is, big hotels, cultural centers, apartment buildings, office buildings, a lot of things is happening. But we needed this example, I think, and something that could touch our senses, something that we have an office in this building today, and I can see when people are walking by, they're touching the facade, which is from cedar. When it rains, you feel the smell of the forest or of the tree, and that's something that has really touched me. And I was thinking about Mr. Palahí's speech about changing the universities into something of our inner wisdom, because it is our inner wisdom that is speaking when we touches a house or when we take an extra deep breath, because we want to get the smell into our system. And what is it? It's something probably that comes from the forest. So I really enjoyed the speak of Marc Palahí before, because it put all those thoughts again into my head. So we need the examples, we need to sense them, but we also need to have these inter-reactions, to sharing knowledge and to spread the knowledge and this kind of wisdom, because when our policymakers understand, that's how we kind of started. We just realized we need to, so we took this and we called it 10 truths about wooden houses, and we made these little brochures, and I've been just out talking to all these politicians, to all these people that are making the decisions in different cities. But there is questions of fire, of is it quiet enough? Is it safe enough? The humidity, and there is all these basic questions, and we need to raise them, we need to talk about them.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. It's obvious that we need those visionary people who start who start those processes, and then also people kind of, I absolutely agree when it comes to the census. Our headquarters, EFI headquarters in Finland, is also built out of wood, and whenever I go there, I touch it. So it's really like, and it brings us back to our kind of fundamental being, I suppose. I would like to complement your perspective with Stefano's point of view, because you're bringing a new perspective to building with trees, obviously in your work with Bosco Verticale in Milan, but also in many other cities all over the world right now. I've researched that, so it's quite inspiring. And you've assembled, of course, extensive expertise and knowledge in building and designing with wood, but also with trees. And I would like to know from you, what were your challenges, and how do you see the role of architects and architecture to contribute to a more sustainable future?
Well, thank you so much. I'd love to, let's say, go back a little bit to this concept of connectivity. And I was saying I love to decline in three main directions. The first is biodiversity, and this is what Marc was saying, but I see also Simone Borrelli there, and with Simone we started some years ago to develop this idea of create and propose on the example of the Green Great Wall in Africa, others biodiversity corridors that should put together the biodiversity hotspots that are present in the planet, and it's a way to also to follow the amazing vision by our friend Richard Weller, who was the first to think to the idea of the war park, where all the biodiversity hotspots are connected. So I believe the first issue is how we can connect conservation parks, marine reserves, wildlife sanctuaries, bioreserves, and natural reserves. And this is what we'd love to do also with the next based in Chicago, World Forum on Urban Forest, we called in autumn in Chicago, with FAO. Second declination is about how we could connect public and private stakeholders. This is not easy, but if we seriously want to do something on of urban forestation, for instance, we have to, let's say, to create a model, a format, a protocol of connection between private and public. And the experience we had in Italy with the Fondazione Futuro della Città and Forestami in Milano, and Maria Chiara Pastore and Livia Shamir are here with us today, it's a connection between five main actors. First, public administration, all. So region, in the case of Italy, provincia or area metropolitana, and municipality. Second, banks. And so, Marc, I totally follow you. If we don't arrive to involve that kind of presence, it's impossible to do something of pragmatic and serious. Third, universities, and that's what we have done in Milano. Fourth, the private stakeholder and citizens. And so in Milano, we started to plant 500,000 plants in 2 years. The idea is to plant 3 million for 2030, but it's going with all the difficulties that we had with the last and recent draft, but we are going ahead. And last but not least, I come to your point. For sure, we have to work on a new idea, a new generation of buildings, at the scale of buildings. Well, we have worked a lot on that with this vertical forest model, but we know well that it is not enough. So we have to imagine that the future should be of buildings that are green, where living nature is not simply a decoration, but is a basic component. But we need also to use wood and timber for the structure, because that's a necessary step. We have to study seriously a very efficient water management system for the buildings that we are going to in the future, also considering what will happen in terms of desertification and the future of climate condition in Europe. Renewable energies, this is, well, sure, it's wind, sun, and so on, but we have to work to make all this affordable to everybody. So I believe this is really what we have to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. I have a follow-up question on the biodiversity, because because that's, I think, a crucial point that is also often not considered in city planning, not yet. So I wonder how you as an architect bring in that idea to, for instance, city planners or also to citizens, because you've been mentioning that also in the beginning, that you would like to, that you have established those processes to also have the people on board. So how do you communicate the need for biodiversity conservation and enhancement?
I'll give you an example. We have just launched in Milano this idea. It's called Custodiscimi, take care of plants. What we do is we let's prepare and let's say distribute small trees to, let's in this case, it's more than 3,000 families. They are taking care for 6 months, and they give back us, and we plant the plant. So that's simply one of the way we have, and we could have. And the other thing is about school. So we are now promoting a large campaign to give to every student of the Italian school one tree to follow, to plant.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to also start with the youth, because they're obviously the future. And to create this ownership of the trees, I think that's very, very important.
More in general, following what Marc was saying, I think we have really to change the narrative of climate change and global warming. So we have to abandon this idea of a kind of punitive and sacrificial approach to sustainability and move to a positive. So what we have to do is simply to improve our lifestyle.
I would like to complement the perspectives now with the perspective of sustainable fashion. Rosella, we've already been talking about wood-based material and trees, and now we bring fashion into the discussion. I wonder how that fits together, and I would like to ask you about your experiences in the sustainable fashion sector, and also how do you, I mean, we've been talking about the circular bioeconomy. How can that look like in the fashion industry, considering the fact that a lot of fashion is created from non-renewable or non-sustainable material?
Sorry. Thank you for your question. No, first of all, absolutely there is a very strong connection between trees, forest, and fashion. We use paper. Yeah. Glasses. We use paper. We have packaging. And so since many years ago, but not only our company, many other companies take care to the forest using packaging FSC certified, for example. So it means that you are sourcing from protecting forest and not endangered forest. This is important, but it's not enough, because in textile sector we can also use some fiber from wood, and in this case we have introduced some type of fiber. For example, viscose is a fiber from wood, not only viscose, but viscose is one of the fiber. And for sure it comes from renewable sources, because one of the more challenges that the fashion sector has in place is to reduce, replace synthetic fiber. It's true. And the synthetic fiber represent, as Marc already showed, the first fiber that the fashion sector are using, fast fashion especially, but not only fast fashion. So the technology in this case, it would be important because it's not so easy to replace in a short term, but now there are some pilot projects in place, because we absolutely have also as company established target and strong commitment to protect the ocean. And the ocean is very connected, for example, to the synthetic fiber for the, unfortunately, the microplastic release. And so as company is fundamental also in terms of circularity to have in place target internationally recognized and validated within a scientific committee, like, for example, science-based target. So as company, for example, we have in place a target to reduce our carbon footprint by 2030 at 50% of scope 1, scope 2, and by more or less 49% for scope 3. Scope 3 means all the supply chain. So it's fundamental to engage all the suppliers when you have in place a sustainability strategy. Circularity is a new business model, but is a business model for the future. So it is absolutely something that the company needs to embrace. Now, I would say that is not a nice to have, but it's a must to have now. And so for sure, all the fiber that comes from biological source, bio-based source, are better and can help us to reduce and to obtain and to reach our target. But there are some challenges on which we have to take care, because now I mentioned viscose, for example, but viscose means for us wood pulp, for sure, but so the source from certified forestry, but also production process that needs to be under control. And it's something sometimes not so easy, because this process is a process on which you use a lot of chemicals to transform the wood pulp in the filament that we can use as fiber. So as fashion brand, we need also to take care also on the environmental process. So in this last year, there are a lot of improvements for many companies to take under control this process thanks to best available technologies in place. So it's another challenge on which we have to face every day.
Yes, I can imagine it's not so straightforward as building with wood, because you just use the wood coming from the tree, but you have an entire process of using the wood-based material, and you need the technology, and you need to make this entire process sustainable. It's quite challenging, and also you need the mind shifts, and you need the people who invest. And I think it's very important that has been, addressed from several perspectives here. And is there also that we need the proper investments in the greener infrastructures, and that also, of course, applies to the fashion industry. And I would like to now start with the second round of questions, where we think a little bit about how to transfer the lessons learned and of those more sustainable business models to other environments, and to inspire, because I think that is really crucial. We found out we need this inspiration from pioneers. And I would like to continue with you, Rosella. And ask you, based on your experience in the past 25 years, I can imagine you've seen a big change, fortunately. But do you think that that those approaches that where also, for instance, Armani is investing in, do you think they have the potential to change the fashion industry? Also, depending on also because consumers' expectations change. Do you think there's like really a big transformation that we can envision in the next 10 years, let's say?
Yeah. Absolutely, a big transformation is in place, also from my observatory, for sure. I think that now there is also a cultural change, especially in this last year, 5-6 years. Probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, fashion especially luxury and sustainability was, the perception was like an oxymoron. Now it's completely changed. Now the fashion sector is really committed. Committed is in place. Then also action needs to be implemented in an effective way. But commitment is in place because fashion, unfortunately, represents one of the most polluted sectors. So fashion can play an important role. And so also inside of European Commission, now there is a big push to the fashion sector, push to have target in place, push to have a system to measure the target and the improvement day by day, and also to be more concrete and also to avoid any type of greenwashing. I'm sorry if I use this term, but sometimes it's quite easy also and we needed to avoid. So to avoid, need to have a concrete program in place to involve our stakeholder, to engage the stakeholder in the process, for example, to build a materiality matrix on the base to identify all the materiality concern that the company needs to take care, needs to communicate in a very effective way. Also inside of the European communication now there is a very big pressure and attention on the green claims. So be very precise. If you tell that this product is made from fiber that comes from cellulosic, for example, fiber, or organic cotton, or something like this, it's important to specify which component of the dress or the product is involved and the percentage of the. So. Also, the suggestion is be very concrete, fix the target, engage all the company and department. So it's fundamental to have all department on board. When we speak and think about sustainability, we need to start with the design department. So now, when we describe the eco-design means that starting from design department, we try to understand the better material, better in terms of the environmental impact, because also on this we have a target. By 2025, we have to reduce, we have to have in our product at least the 25% of low environmental impact materials. And materials that comes from forests are in our list as a sustainable material. So many things, many action, and also one of my favorite terms also in this case is having in place an holistic approach, a 360 degree. Also when you measure your impacts, it's fundamental to calculate an LCA, and it's not easy because we need to have all data and information from raw material to the end of life of products. So it's a big challenge.
Yes, especially considering the life cycle and the entire production process. Which also leads me to a second question that is, I think, needs to be put on the table, which is the limited availability of the resources, or the potential limited availability of resources. And I would like to ask Sandra, because obviously the markets for wood products are expanding, including with the fashion industry, but also for building. And we have those different demands our forests are facing, not just the use of wood, but also biodiversity, conservation, and other ecosystem services. And I wonder what happens if everyone wants to work with wood, and we have limited availability of resources. So I would like to know how you address this challenge at Arvid.
It is a challenge. But it is with all materials. And we started to talk about something, was saying that we need to grow our cities, grow the building materials, just like we grow our food. So what we are doing today, so when we built our first house 10 years ago, we were very much attacked from many parts of the Swedish society, because the forest is so deep within all of us that don't touch it, because it's my recreation. And I remember we actually invited WWF, which was having an ad campaign, and were a bit like asking us, what do you want for Sweden? Is this what you want to see? And it was a picture of a totally cut down forest. And so we realized we need to talk about this, and we need to invite everybody that has a question or are raising a question, or there was also, I don't know how many firemen that have been to our houses, because that was also an issue really to talk about. But then we started to say, well, have you thought about what we are constructing our buildings of today? It's limestone carries, because you need to take limestone to, and having this process, which is very much letting out all these emissions, and only to produce the cement, it's letting out more than double the amount as the flight industry. And we didn't even talk about it. Nobody knew at this time. And then we were, so there is a limestone quarry, and it will never grow back. And I've also had the opportunity to go down to Kenya a couple of times, having exhibitions at UN Habitat. And the first time we had a wooden pavilion there to show how we can construct, because in many countries they don't even know that you can build out of wood, because it seems like a cheap material, and it's just bushes, and it's something you cut down and you burn it up. So it's not valuable. And then I was invited down there, and I thought, how do I go down to Africa, to Kenya, and talk about that they should build their future cities out of timber when they have not replanted their original forests? So there are very less forests left. And I came to think about the Swedish history. And it's not much more than 100 years ago. Then we had big deforestation, big starvation. People were so poor, we fled the country over to the United States to find the, what do you say, to the eventual success. And it is a similar situation that it is in many countries today. And at that time, our government was foresight enough to say that, make new legislation that said, for each tree you take down, you have to plant a new one. And today we plant 3 to 4, and as we heard before, we had more than double the amount of forest than we had 100 years ago. And it has built up the Swedish welfare system that is quite well known globally. So it was actually the flourishment and the richdom came from this new legislation that said that we had to use the forest, use it for production of different things, and also having the people staying in rural areas to create jobs there, to make them that they could live out of the forests. And the houses that we've been building down in Stockholm now, they were actually, we wanted them to be as much prefabricated off-site as possible. Because there is another thing, living in a city, and I'm thinking of that going around in Rome, with the traffic situation, with all these people that are living in cities, and most of us have administrational works. We are not so physical in what we're doing. So cutting off like a central area of a city for building, for construction, which can take up to 2 years, it's crucial. And it costs a lot of money. And it costs a lot of things for us who lives in the city. So the first 2 houses, they were actually to 80% prefabricated up in the north, where people have lived for generations out of the forest. They have the knowledge, they have the tradition of making, living from the forest, and also producing panels that were, it was actually the CLT, insulation, the facade, even the windows, and we took them down, they drove down to the city. So instead of cutting off the city for 24 months, we did it for 7 months. So in 7 months, the people could move in there. And that's a big thing. But now I'm off the topic, I realize. That happens. But we need to see the forest as something, and we need to take global responsibility, equal responsibility on this. And as a country, we could serve as a good example in how you can rebuild your economy, and especially now when there is a future. The circular economy is what we need, and we are going into. So, just seeing the resources that we are growing our building material instead of taking steel and concrete that will never grow back. So we also need to talk about what we have done all these years, because it's very easy to criticize something that is coming, and of course we should be doing that, we should be critical, but it's easy to think that something that you're doing today, it's okay, because we have never thought in these ways before.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. I think you touched upon several important points. We will not talk so much about the rural areas today because we're the Biocities facility here, but it's of course also crucial to think about how to engage with rural areas and to find, because it's important to consider the holistic approach which involves the rural areas.
Yeah, but I want to reply because I saw there is a map of Sweden over there, and you see up in the north, that's definitely rural areas, and that's where our ambassador before talked about the battery factory, and these. I mean, there is cities growing out of this new industry, so it will be our new cities and not just rural areas anymore.
Yes, so implying that this can also transform an area to become a biocity eventually. I would like to ask Marc, because we've had this discussion about the limited resources, and I would like to ask you, how do you imagine this to take place in the city, and then maybe also Stefano afterwards, to build the material, well, to grow the material in the city, to use it? How can that look like let's say, in 10 years from now?
I think the question you put to Sandra is very crucial, and I think I will give you a few facts to answer it, but the first thing, we need to tackle our addiction to consumption, because even if we replace fossil by bio, we will have the same problem. You know, we are addicted to consumption. Fashion industry is a very good example. In the last 15 years, the consumption per capita has doubled of clothes, imagine double, but the time that lasts the clothes that is being used has halved. So I mean, with this rhythm of consumption, doesn't matter if you replace things, we are entering into a vicious cycle. And why we are addicted to consumption? Because starting from the way we are measuring the success of our economy. We use GDP growth. GDP is the measure of welfare, and it was never meant to be a measure of welfare. The economists that invented the concept, Kuznets, already said in the 30s that this is just a proxy to measure productivity, overall consumption. And now a measure has been transforming our target. So we believe that to show a success in a country, GDP needs to grow. So we need to change the paradigm of how do we measure our economies. This is why I mentioned before, we need to place life, nature at the center, not consumption. Consumption is to survive, but it doesn't have to be the target. So how do we change that? We need also economists to change the way to measure success, because at the end, politicians want to show very nice figures about GDP, but what it means GDP at the end of the day for nature, for everything. So first of all, a circular bioeconomy will not succeed unless we reduce consumption. Second, we should increase efficiency also. But in the last 30 years, global GDP, global middle class have almost tripled. But the consumption of wood has increased only 15%. So forest industry has been very successful in increasing efficiency. But then it's not only efficiency, we need to use wood for the right purposes. Nowadays, we use per year 4 billion cubic meters of wood. Half of it, 2 billion per year, are used for low efficient energy, especially in the global south. Africa is harvesting 50% more wood than in Europe. But the value of that wood, in terms of export, is 17 times less, because 90% goes for low efficient energy. If we would provide Africa with the right renewable energy infrastructure, solar energy, and we would use the wood that currently Africa uses for low efficient energy, we could replace fully the whole textile market immediately. With the right technology, we could shift all the polyester to wood-based textiles. So reduce consumption, increase efficiency, the right purpose. You know, everything together, I think we would manage to have enough wood. Africa is where it will take place, the big urbanization of the next 20 years. Again, if the current wood resources would be used for timber construction, Africa would have enough timber to build all the urban infrastructures by timber, provided we have the right investments, infrastructure. But you see, as an hypothesis, it's good to have these big picture numbers, because things are possible. But again, if we don't tackle our addiction to consumption, doesn't matter the technology we will have. Again, we are developing nice technologies, but we are trapped like a hamster, you know? So we need to stop and really think what it makes sense in this world. What do we value? How do we value our economy? It's about well-being, it's about health, it's about friendship, you know? But we're addicted with this consumption. So I think here we need a big transformation by politicians, economies.
Yeah, and the problem is that the economy currently is kind of focusing on growth, and that's the kind of main purpose at the moment. So, and I really like also this, and it's everywhere on this panel, to see this to see the holistic view, not just from different disciplines, but also from like a worldwide perspective, so a global holistic perspective. And I would also like to ask Stefano, and then also, of course, Yvonne, what your experiences are in this global environment, and how do you manage to transfer the business model into very different also cultural environments? Because that's also crucial. We can't say like what we do is good when other cultures have a totally different approach to nature, for instance, or to the use of wood. So I would like to ask you, Stefano, first, and then also Yvonne, how you approach this in your work.
Well, I believe we have to act immediately, all together, and in many different fields. It's very urgent to keep these three things together, now, together, basically everywhere. And just to go ahead with what Marc was saying, well, just think to the food consumption. Food consumption, it's crucial for the future. Just think that if we observe the population of mammals on the planet, we know that livestock is 62% of the world mammals population. 62. That means that humans are 34 and wild mammals are 4. Okay? I repeat. Livestock 62, humans 34, wild mammals 4. If we go in the field of birds, okay, poultry biomass is 71.5%. Chickens. But we eat only for them. They live only for being eaten by us. And all the other population of wild birds is 29.5. Okay, that's simply what we have to show. We have to immediately change our logic of diets and also our relation with wildlife.
Can I add one figure?
Please.
You inspire me. One thing, because this shows the paradox we are facing. Nowadays, around 700 million people in the world are facing obesity. As many people are facing malnutrition. So what is wrong here? We are spending much more money in tackle obesity, diabetes, etc., than in malnutrition. So again, is this...
But the point is a narrative, so that all this not necessarily should be, let's say, a way to go into kind of sacrificial and punitive mood. No, not at all. We have to simply to improve our diet, our lifestyle, our relationship.
Yeah.
New renaissance, yes. You mentioned it, yes.
A positive narrative, you know, is to create a better world.
Yeah, and the narrative shouldn't focus on what we will not be allowed to do, but about the opportunities that we have if we transform our consumption. So I think that's, I'm a communication expert, so I'm all in for narratives. Now I would like to also bring in, because that's very crucial, the perspective of the administration, because eventually they are the ones who provide the environment for this transformation and change. So I wonder, Yvonne, how can local authorities support, or what can local authorities do to support this change that we need? And also when it comes to, for instance, creating those green spaces in the cities for enhanced biodiversity, for recreation for people, what can cities learn from your experience? And do you also maybe have a recommendation for Rome, for all the people here from Rome?
Well, I think probably a key challenge that most cities face is actually access to finance, and then overcoming their short-term political cycles, because most city governments around the world have electoral cycles for their politicians. So how do you actually overcome those challenges with commitments to funding, given that your political direction can change every 3, 4, or 5 years? So this is a key challenge, I think, for the cities. And what I've found is that community integration can actually overcome some of these problems. So by that I mean involving cities or citizens in decision making. So I mentioned before, you know, when we look at, you know, community engagement, in urban forests, we often think, let's bring people in to plant trees. But what we need to do instead is bring them in and involve them in the decision-making processes for urban forests. So, for example, about a decade ago, or more than a decade ago, I led a large-scale community participation program in Melbourne as part of developing the city's first urban forest strategy. And as part of that, over 20,000 Melburnians actually participated in the process of designing and shaping their future urban forest. So they were involved in discussions and decisions from prioritizing locations of where to plant, what to plant, when to plant it. And we really listened to them and spent almost a period of 3 years doing that to make these plans for the city that have then now been implemented, and more than a decade later, despite 3 political cycles with 3 different levels of politics changing, they're fully funded and committed to. And that's because the community holds the politicians accountable. So when a commitment is made, it's so easy for the next government to walk away from it. But if it's really important to your community, they won't allow it. And they won't allow it if they've been involved and they have that level of ownership and stewardship over the urban forest. So I think that that is, that's really critical. And I also think in terms of, you know, how we transfer lessons is sharing the case studies. So for example, I have always found Stefano's project Bosco Verticale to be so inspiring. And some of the lessons that have been shared from that have, you know, influenced a lot of work that's happened in Melbourne, for example. So now we have mandatory greening regulations for private sector development. So government shouldn't fund everything. We need to look towards how the private sector can get involved. Green buildings, not just of wood, but green roofs and vertical walls as well, is important. So I think that, you know, looking to those really successful case studies is super important. And then we also need, we've talked about universities, but the research is critical. So what I'm seeing more and more is that no matter what part of the world you're in, and I'm from Ireland where it rains all of the time, you know, even we have water shortages there now. So it doesn't really matter whether you're in Saudi Arabia or Ireland or in Roma or Milano, we're all looking at more and more drought periods, and how we can kind of contend with this is really essential. Because if we want to continue to grow trees in our cities, then we need to be looking at the species that we're planting. We need to do the research to understand what species are being pushed out of their climatic thresholds. And it's happening. I've seen it in Spain. I know they don't notice, but it is happening. And so, for example, you know, here you have the Populus alba is commonly planted. We had this tree in Melbourne. We had to stop planting it a decade ago because it can't grow there anymore. It simply dies every time you plant it because it's now too hot. And we've recognized that the city has warmed by almost 2 degrees. And so I think the research around species suitability for the future for every city is critical, and cities need to be working on that now. And then, as Stefano mentioned, water efficiency and actually innovation. So we need to look at how we design water-sensitive cities. So how our cities can function as sponges when we have flood events, but then can also provide that function where we've collected and stored water and can reuse it when we have drought periods. So I think there's some of the essential core ideas around transferring lessons to local authorities.
Thank you, Yvonne. I wonder, I have a follow-up question because I find it super inspiring that you work in Saudi Arabia. What are your, because it's obviously, I mean, I imagine what we know also from the pictures is that it's rather dry. So how does it work with the tree planting there and the urban green spaces?
Sure, it is dry for sure. And, you know, that's an understatement. I mean, you know, from, let's say, April until September, October every year, you have the thermometer hitting more than 40 degrees Celsius. So every day and beyond, even up to 50 at times. So what you classify as a heat wave in Europe is generally 3, 4, 5 days over 35 degrees. That's winter in Saudi Arabia, okay? So people think you can't grow desert or trees in the desert, but the desert has its own ecology. It always has had. They've got really unique, resilient species. And in Riyadh, over the last 4 years, we've been planting trees. So one of the projects I worked on there was Green Riyadh, which is a plan to plant 7.5 million trees. It's an 11 billion euro project. Point me any other city that's investing 11 billion euro in green infrastructure. Most of that is going on building a water network that can sustainably support the trees. So people drink water, they use water every day, but what happens with that water afterwards? What are we doing with wastewater in our cities? Why are we calling it wastewater? Why are we not treating it as a renewable resource? And so in Riyadh, we're looking at using the wastewater as a renewable resource to support a healthy, functioning ecosystem and an urban forest. And so over the past 4 years, about 100,000 trees have been planted. And anybody who's visited the city before and after can really see it. And even they're saying the dust pollution has reduced by about 30% just with that marginal effort. So it really can be done. And I think that probably Saudi Arabia is a city that's set, or that has the cities that are going to set maybe the climate adaptation benchmarks for other cities into the future.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. So if we want to be inspired, we should definitely make the effort to look to Saudi Arabia. And also, I mean, several things have been mentioned on the panel, including, of course, considering the local ecosystem, the local administration, the local societies. This is not a summary yet, but we're almost there. I would like to have Marc. I would like to have Marc because I wanted to have a wrap up, but I think a lot of inspiring things have been said, and I would like it to settle. But since this is the Biocities facility, and we will work with science and we will kind of elaborate and learn how to convey those scientific messages and to bring them to policymakers, to the public. I would like to come back to Marc, to your speech, to the role of Biocities and the role they can play as catalysator for a new renaissance. And I wonder, how can you maybe sum up with some of your thinking about the role of science and of course also education, because we need to convey those messages. I'm too loud. I have a very loud voice. Can put the microphone a little away. What the role science can play, and of course also education, and how you see that here also in Rome.
Thank you. Would you want short answer or?
2 minutes.
Okay. Look, at the end, coming back to what I said before, we are in front of an unprecedented transformation. Never before we had to transform the economy in the way we have to do it in the next 20 years, in terms of speed and size and scale. So science needs to do its part, and scientists need to be proactive. And this is one of the roles of EFI, and why we are creating these biocities, to embrace brilliant people like Stefano, like Rosella, like Sandra, like Yvonne, because the transformation needs to come by connecting the dots. Mm-hmm. So again, universities need to change also, because they need to inspire a future, and this needs to happen through transdisciplinarity. This is the first message, transdisciplinarity. For policymakers, some messages, I think Stefano put it very well. Now we are in a moment again that we need public-private partnerships. But this is not public-private debates or forums, it's partnerships. So it's putting money together and having a joint vision and doing it. So it's something that is still not happening at the scale. And I think to summarize with something that people can remember, with 4 I's, the type of transformation and initiative we need is 4 I's. Innovation, which is not technology. Innovation is new business models, new ways of doing. Includes technology, but it's not technology, and it is very important. New infrastructures, and this means green infrastructures, soft infrastructures, universities, but also infrastructures to process our biological resources, biorefineries instead of oil refineries. Institutions, policies, because we need a new regulatory framework, and this is where science needs to help policymakers to design the decision-making framework for the new regulatory framework that needs to channel all this. And finally, investments. And coming back to the banks, to the finance, look, we need to finance this transformation. It needs to happen from the private sector. So the bankers, we need to convince bankers. They need to, if they don't believe and they don't have the understanding, it will not happen. So we are talking about deploying billions of euros in the next 10, 20 years. So 4 I's, I think this will be easy to remember.
That was perfectly in 2 minutes. Thank you, Marc. And I found it important that you also got back into some of the points in your presentation, because from communication science we know people need to hear something 10 times actually before to make it really like internalize it. No worries, you won't need to listen to this 10 times. The panel is over now, but I think we got a lot of inspiration from the panel. Thank you very much to the panelists. I learned a lot, and I hope you also did. And I would like to hand over to Helga again now, who will have the final words before lunch. Thanks.
Dear panelists, I would really like to thank you for this inspiring panel, and I think all of us now smell the forest, smell the tree, want to touch a wooden building, maybe even want to live in a wooden building, go outside, roam, take care of a tree, maybe wear some sustainable wood-based fashion, and of course, read what scientists can tell us, and then be very interested what Giuseppe's team in Biocities facility will do research on. But now, my task is to stand between your lunch and the end of the summarize this interesting ThinkForest event. I was thinking when Gesche said, what would be your 3 hashtags? Well, my 3 hashtags, now listening to all of you, would be change of mindsets, use alternative pathways that forests and trees provide for us in cities, but then the last but not least, also transform to a circular bioeconomy and also reduce our consumption. So what do I mean by this? It's clearly, as we have heard also from Marc's presentation and during the panelists, that we really need to transform to our current economy to a more bioeconomy that is circular, maybe regionally sourced, and also closely intertwined with cities. We have heard in the beginning of our day that cities are really central, because by 2050, 70% of the population globally will live in the cities. So we need more material, and we need to think about where the material comes from. Of course, it needs to be sustainably sourced. We need more buildings to live in, and also we need material for other usages. But to achieve our climate and biodiversity targets, we also need to try to reduce our environmental impact. So we need to think about how to reduce this environmental impact. And as Rosella said, we need to produce circular economies that also take care of reduction of the environmental impact. And maybe life cycle analysis would help us to track this impact. And then secondly, forests and trees that provide alternative pathways to build our cities. But forests do not only provide material, they also offer non-wood goods, and they offer a lot of other cool benefits. They are heavens of biodiversity, as we have heard. They provide clean water, they store carbon, they offer climate sinks, but also reduce the heat in the cities, as we have heard now from the example from Saudi Arabia. And of course, forests also have positive effects on physical, mental, and social health, and as well, individual well-being. We all like to go to the forest and feel more comfortable when we can touch a tree. All this is needed in cities, and urban planning is not easy. And I think what we have learned from E1 is that even there is an abundance of trees available, we need to choose the right one. And this tree also needs to be available when we need it for urban planning. So we need to even think ahead of that. But what we also learned from today is that architects and designers, they use wooden-based materials in the design, not only when they are building multi-story buildings or in fashion, but also they track their environmental impacts, they try to reduce this. And of course, we know that reducing greenhouse gas emissions compared to building with concrete is clearly provided by modern wooden buildings. The same can be true for textiles that are based on wood, where we can also reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But all of these approaches, as we have learned from Rosella and from Stefano, are not coming without challenges, and of course we need more research, and in the afternoon we will also hear about Biocities and research connected to that and the research agenda. Last but not least, there's a change of mindset needed. So we need social acceptance, and we also need social demand for this new way of buildings. So citizens, all of us, and everyone outside this room needs to be convinced of this way of living. And also, we have to understand the perceptions of these citizens and ways to encourage sustainable consumer behavior and also use less. That's also something we need to say to support this transformative change. Last but not least, and we've heard this also during the panel, to transform our societies, we need governments. And we need governments at the local level, but at the regional, also at the national level and globally, that support these policies, these new ways of thinking with policies and policy instruments. And here we should clearly aim to reduce barriers. And of course, it's never easy in policy change because there's different interests and different ideas how to address this policy change. But I can tell you everything is possible if we all work together. And last but not least, also educational institutions that we have heard from Marc need to take the responsibility and actually make it possible that forest scientists, architects, urban planners, medical doctors, social scientists, and many more work together and actually find safe spaces to discuss with designers, with business people and finance people to get together and find new ways. So, ladies and gentlemen, with these 3 ideas and take-home messages, I would like to conclude this ThinkForest event. I very much would like to thank you to be all with us. I would also like to thank the online community to be here. Please don't forget to come back at 2 o'clock Central European time, because we will have a very engaged panel there as well, learn new things and hear about the research agenda and the Biocities book that will be published soon. So thank you for being with us. But ladies and gentlemen, we all, European Forest Institute, would now like to invite you for lunch, and Livia will tell us how to get there. Thank you.
That's important. Thank you, Helga.